Timelines. Do you know what makes sense? Timelines. No, they don't. They never make time sense. I almost said don't almost make, they never. Yeah, but timelines never make sense ever. Especially with FNAF, because we have dates and then we have different dates that date could be and all that. So we're gonna go over that and hopefully it goes out well. If it doesn't, then womp womp. Starting with the first one, FNAF 1. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 is a game that is the first one in the franchise, and that's where a timeline starts in most cases, or at least a basis we get for a timeline. Now, since the beginning, back in 2014, due to Game Theory's video, we first got the date of 1993 for FNAF 1. He calculated it through minimum wage stuff and was able to get, based on minimum wage and how much we were making in the first game, between 1991 and 1996. Now, this was a great basis because it's actually a basis we used for about the last 11, almost 12 years of the game franchise, and it works well in many cases. But there's been more of a recent, I guess you would say, development on if the game actually takes place in 1993 or other dates. Again, we're gonna go over it again. 1993, as I just stated, was coined first back then when Matt Pat made his video on the timeline, but there are more evidence for 1993 than some people might think or might know, which is in August 2015, Scott Cawthon stated, "Everyone solved the FNAF story," and since 1993 was in that consensus of FNAF 1 back then, it was always universally, stated, oh, 1993, Scott basically came from 1993. But also the fact that people have found in a scrapped fast facts from special delivery, it implies the FNAF 1 location opened up in 1988 and closed in 1993. Within those 3 years, or did I say 5 years, timeline of when it was opened and closed. Now, also, in the week before, it also seems to support FNAF 1 location being open at least in 1988, since Cuparella, Ralph or Phone Guy's daughter, went to Freddy's when she was 7, and she's turning 12 in December. So that could be 5 years, again, 5 years. 7 plus 5 equals 12. 1988 and 5 years later is 1993. Now, I didn't mention this at first, but another reason why Game Theory came up with this date of 1993 for when FNAF 1 happened, other from the timeline of the minimum wage calculation, was for the fact that also he talked about the 5 murders at Chuck E. Cheese. The original theory had the MCI was inspired by the real life incident in which 5 people were murdered after hours in a Chuck E. Cheese on December 17th, 1993. This year's matched with the approximate date, again, because of the paycheck. You got that different paycheck, so it just matched in that case. And that was the first theory of FNAF 1 was inspired by that, where Scott Cawthon later on saying, no, it was not inspired, and what happened, but it was not inspired by the real-life murder in Chuck E. Cheese. 1989. Now, 1989 is a date that first became relevant to me, at least, through the week before. I haven't seen anyone else go over 1989 before then, but it seems like with the week before coming out, 1989 became a date surging in the community, and honestly, I can believe it too. Honestly, I'm like been split between 1993 and 1989 because of what I've seen the week before. The number one fact for why people think it's 1989 is because the week before contains multiple direct pop culture references that collectively points out to the date of 1989, at least as the earliest, with one fact saying how Ralph mentions that his daughter, Cuparella, owns a Sega Genesis, which was released in August 1989. Another one, the fact that Ralph mentions multiple Lethal Weapon movie, the second which released in July 1989. Ralph makes a reference to Die Hard, which was originally released in 1988. And Ralph makes a reference to the original Star Wars trilogy, the latest of which was released in May 1983. The book appears to reference the closure of the 1987 location and the Big Bite as relative recent events in the story, while also suggesting that the pizzeria where the story takes place opened not too long ago. these are great evidence because it's from the week before, which the week before, if you don't know, takes place 1 week before our FNAF 1 gameplay. So a week before FNAF 1 is when this book takes place. That's something in timeline we do know. When, we don't fully know. Now the only problem I'm seeing is apparently I don't have the book, but apparently I've read that it mentions The Godfather 3, which if you didn't know, The Godfather 3 released later on in the years. It released, I think, in the 90s. I'll put it on the screen when it released, but it released then, and that is after 1989. So with this mentioning The Godfathers in 1989, there's a or after 1989 and referencing The Godfathers, there's a problem with it taking place in 1989. Just to say though, with my own feelings on the dates, again, it's all up to you what you believe, but personally, I still am on the 1993. The 1991 date is really convincing, but I'm still stuck with 1993 as a date. I don't think Freddy's was open that short. I mean, and yet it's Freddy's, but that short, I don't know. Especially with there not being MCIs or stuff happening there, and them closing just because the restaurant was crap. I generally think they're open for more than a year because I am still convinced that the FNAF 1 location did open up in 1988, but that's just me. FNAF Sister Location, if you didn't know, FNAF Sister Location is one of the ones I don't like because it's a fun game, but I never know when it takes place. When does it take place? Do you know when it takes place? I don't either. Every time I talk to my friends about it and make a timeline on it of when FNAF Sister Location takes place, I always say it's before FNAF 1, and I end up saying it's after FNAF 1. So which is it? I don't know, but let's go over the facts. After FNAF 1, and just note for this, with the after FNAF 1, we're going with the 1993 date. If you want to use 1989, sure, but I'm going with the 1993 date. In the fourth closet, Charlie and her friends visit the FNAF Circus Baby pizzeria and encounter Circus Baby and her Funtime animatronics in the year 1997, after Freddy's had closed and William was spring locked. Now I know people are like, "Oh, why are we using the books?" Listen, the books gave us the name William Afton. The book starts giving us Henry Emily, who Henry is. It's giving us so many things. So I feel like I can use the books here. I'm not saying the books and the games and the movies always had the same thing, but using the books for evidence and all of this works. So bear with me here. Uh, Another one is that from the Tales of the Pizzaplex, a story called Didophobia. A kid named Rory is trapped, abandoned by Afton in a sister location bunker, suffering the nightmare experiments that Afton had going. He does eventually break out free and explores the facility. He sees Ballora posted on stage in the Ballora Gallery, meaning that the event of Sister Location have not taken place yet, because first of all, in Sister Location, you get scooped and all the animatronics break down and stuff. And also the fact that if Afton abandoned the experiments 10 years because he was spring locked, that would mean the experiments were abandoned in 1988 or later. A decade would have set in Didophobia in 1998 or later, placing Sister Location after FNAF 1. Now, again, FNAF 1, in my opinion, does open in 1988. So that's the timeline when it opens, closure in 1993, since we're going with that date. But that's the story added to this, in my opinion. Another fact is William Afton destroyed the classic animatronics and collected their remnant after the closure of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which was some point in the 90s. William would have had injected the MCI, or the remnant of the MCI, into the Funtime animatronics after the closure of FNAF 1 Pizzeria. Thus, the event of FNAF 1 would have occurred before such a location, thus sending Michael down right before getting spring locked. I do believe it is after FNAF 1, also in my opinion, from that fact which I just stated, but in general, me thinking that, well, how would William be able to send Michael if he got spring locked, right? So such a location would have had to be after FNAF 1. William Afton didn't get spring locked in 1983. I don't believe he did. I believe it was after FNAF 1 when he got spring locked, you know. And I don't want to go far into it because I don't want to be a long video, but I personally do believe that FNAF such a location happens in the 2000s, or either really late 90s or early 2000s, just for the fact that I believe after William sent Michael to work at FNAF 1 and all of that, after he got fired from FNAF 1, they closed down in 1993. After 1993, they were closed for a while, and then later on, years later maybe, but later on, William appeared at the place, killed or destroyed the animatronics. Soul Meadow kept coming back over the years or whatever, kept coming back but destroying the animatronics for the Soul Remnant, and then before, in my opinion, on his last time there, before that, the same day he disappeared and got springlocked, he was like, "Hey, Michael, I need you to go down to that bunker." Michael goes down to bunker. That same night, the first night of such a location, is when Michael goes down to the bunker. First night of such a location is when he gets springlocked. Michael often goes down to the bunker that first night. William leaves, goes to FNAF 1 location, gets springlocked. That's my own belief. It makes sense if you think about it, but that's just me. Let's continue. Sister Location 2015. Now, Sister Location 2015 is just putting a date on it for after FNAF. What I said previously was just for after FNAF 1, but this one puts a date on it for Sister Location 2015. Let's get into it. FNAF 3. FNAF 3 is the third installment in the FNAF franchise, and its dates been, I feel, consistent enough, but there's still different dates in the timeline, and I kind of want to go over it, right? So FNAF 3, in my opinion, is 2023, because the fact that on the Steam page it says after the closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria 30 years later, and if it's simple, 1993 plus 30 years is 2023, so it works. But let's just go into the other dates real quick. 2015. The proof for 2015 is really interesting because it does show that it works well, and that fact that Scott was anonymous, or how do you say it, vague about 30 years later. He just says 30 years later after Freddy's closed his door, which to me, and I feel like most people, we're thinking after FNAF 1 closed down because that was the last Freddy's, right? But people have also gone to state about the 1985 location, the location that was out from 1983 to 1985, but closed down due to the MCI. That location closed, that Freddy's closed, which I don't agree with, but 30 years after that would be 2015. Now, I can see why, because again, Scott was ambiguous, saying 30 years later, and the fact that in FNAF The Ultimate Guide appears to reference this again, saying the third game was 30 years after the horrific event, and the attraction was built around those myths and infamous murders, and the horrific event didn't happen in the FNAF 1 location in 1993. Those events happened in the Freddy Pizzeria of 1985, which is really interesting to think about. Also, throughout the franchise, whenever a Freddy's location is said to be closing, the language has always sounded final. The first game states Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria has announced it will be closed by year's end. FNAF 2 says Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria has closed its doors, and Hand Unit and Sister Location reference to the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. That particular location shut down in 1985, 2 years before the events of the second game. So the Steam page may not necessarily be talking about the final closure of it, but that's just the evidence I have to support 2015. At my point, saying 2023 because I believe FNAF 1 ended, and it's talking about the closure of FNAF 1. Because why is it talking about the closure of Freddy's first location if it's not talking about the 1987 or 1988 to 1993 location? In my opinion, I'm just saying, you know. Anyway, guys, with each timeline, what I believe, again, I believe FNAF 1 is 1993. I believe such a location is after 1993, but not before 2015. And then I believe FNAF 3 is 2023. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.